Good morning, everybody. My name is Eric Dillner. I'm the CEO of the Shoreline Arts Alliance. We're so glad you joined us today. We're thrilled that we have Jason Mancini, Scott Wands, Leanne Partridge from the Connecticut Humanities, and Liz Shapiro from the Connecticut Office of the Arts. What you've joined today, just make sure you're in the right spot. I like it when they do that on the airplanes so that I know that I'm going to the right town. We're here talking about the Connecticut Cultural Fund operating support grants, a huge, amazing gift to the Connecticut community that these folks that I just mentioned created for all of you. Just a quick request. We'd love you to put all your questions into the chat. We're going to try to answer some of them along the way, but then also we'll have plenty of time at the end to do some Q&A. We'll probably dig into the chat, but then also get some live questions. We'd love you to turn on your screen. We love seeing faces, but we'd love you also to keep the mute button off. In other words, muted for the beginning part of this conversation, and then we'll get going from there. So that's pretty much what it's all about today, is checking out the application, the guidelines, figuring out where you fit, and then of course try to help you see if we can get you into some of this funding. $16 million, am I right? Does that sound about right?
$16 million this year.
Yeah, that's just a remarkable in operating support for museums, history, arts, humanities organizations, almost you name it, right? So but we're going to learn about all that here, all that here in a minute. So Jason, Executive Director of the of Connecticut Humanities, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to pass that over to you so you can introduce your team and Liz as well. So thanks so much. We are so thrilled you're here helping all of us out.
Great, thanks, Eric. Good to be here with everybody. We're really excited about this opportunity. We've been able to secure a total of $30.7 million over the next 2 years. 16 million of that, as Eric mentioned, is going out by or before Christmas. This year, we're looking at really transforming the way Connecticut works. Liz and I have been in frequent contact and aligned with how we imagine Connecticut can work more closely together across arts and humanities. So this is our big pitch to all of you to join us, to engage, to imagine Connecticut in a much better and healthier, more sustainable place as we build and imagine our future. This funding, Scott will certainly get into it a little bit more. This funding is aimed at both operating support, but also connecting our organizations with educators and students, as well as building IT and digital infrastructure to create greater access to our content, to our educational and artistic resources. And with that, I'll actually turn it to Liz, and then she'll introduce Scott, or turn it over to Scott and Leanne. So my dear friend, Liz Shapiro.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everybody. So by now you'd think that we would have this whole show on the road, Pat, but we keep saying new things at you never know what's going to come out of our mouths, basically. I am delighted with the Office of the Arts to be partnering with Connecticut Humanities. We envisioned our partnership well before the pandemic started, and we began to think about how our thinking about what this sector looks like if we are working together, how our thinking is aligned, because we believe that we have a lot more power as if we work with a concerted voice. So what you're seeing here now, and what you're going to learn about from Scott, is an opportunity to begin to have the first really data set, because this is the first grant that has ever happened in the state of Connecticut that is going to be the same grant application for arts organizations, for humanities organizations, for museums, for history organizations, whatever you consider yourself. If you are a nonprofit organization, or if you're striving to become a nonprofit organization, there will likely be funding for you. And as a part of this, we're going to be in the fortunate position of being able to collect a lot of data from you. without asking for too much burdensome information. The goal of this is that at the end, we will have an idea of what this sector looks like. And so working with you all and all of your voices and with our regional partners like the Shoreline Arts Alliance and others across the state, we will be able to go to the legislature and our individual legislators and say, this is what our sector is, this is who makes up our sector, and this is what we need. And so that's the goal here. So if you see, if you're worried that you don't see yourself in this pool, I'm here to assure you, and Scott will assure you, that you probably do belong in this pool. And then the last thing I'm going to say is, if you're here, but you know an organization down the street, or there's an organization that your kids go to, or that there's an organization that serves your aging parents, that is an arts, culture, museum, humanities-based organization, please share this information. It might mean for this time around, there'll be a little less in the pot for each individual organization, but we need to know what the extent of this full community is, because we will not be able to right size our asks for the future unless we know the totality of what we are right now. So without anything else, I'm going to turn it over to Scott and Leanne, and we'll get the show on the road.
Great. Thank you, Liz. And many thanks to Eric and the Shoreline Arts Alliance for hosting us this morning. I see many familiar names and faces out there, and I'm glad to see you all. We're going to try to answer all your questions about the grant, the application process, anything that you would have to make you feel like you can jump off of this webinar this morning and fill out an application in quick order. So I'm going to walk you through our website, the guidelines for this program, as well as the application, but I want to leave ample time at the end, hopefully about half of our hour for Q&A, but do post questions as they come up in the chat. Leanne, my colleague here, does a great job of trying to respond to them in real time. When we get to the Q&A, you can use the hand raise feature, and we'll start to call on you, and we'll go back over some of the chat with the full group as well. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. I want to jump into our website just to show you where you're going to start with stuff. So let's go here. All right. So the one website you need to remember is just our own cthumanities.org. There are other sites we're going to talk about and links, but if you go to cthumanities.org and you hover over Connect, over our work, you get to where all our grants information lives. And I'm going to move all our faces so I can move my mouse. Over our work is where all the grants information lives. And we're talking about the CT Cultural Fund Operating Support Grants. There are many other grant lines that we offer. Today, we're talking about the operating support grants. When you click that link, you end up where we are right now, which is our landing page for this program. It has links to go to our guidelines, which we'll talk about. You can preview the application so you can see all the questions before you even go into the system, and direct buttons to click apply and start an application. I want to talk about some of the information that's on the right here, and this will be things you're going to see not only on this screen, but on future screens. But again, as Liz said, this is not here to scare you off and try to find some way that we're not going to give a museum, a historical society, an arts organization, a cultural organization funding. This is because we know that there are lots of other organizations in need, social services and other organizations that are looking for funding. And when we've opened other operating support lines, we're getting applications from EMS providers and hospice cares and programs to provide diapers to babies, wonderful programs, but not the funding we're looking for here. This is for the arts, history, museum, cultural community. So we'll have several different places where we'll talk about what those types of organizations are and what they do. And by and large, people on this call today are going to be those organizations. You could be a nonprofit, you could be town run, you could be a state entity like Gillette Castle, you could be one of the 5 Connecticut recognized tribal nation organizations that do these things. You all are eligible for this funding. We will ask, and you'll see in the application, some information about what your mission is and what your bylaws are, and wording here about at least 51% of your activities in your budget are on cultural, humanities, and arts activities. You do not need to get out the calculator. If you are a historical society, if you are, I saw Judy Dwarn Performance Project here, all of what you do is arts, culture, humanities. You do not need to get out a calculator and figure out staffing versus other things. Your whole activities are there. This is along the lines of some of the other types of organizations that we fund at Connecticut Humanities. We fund some organizations that do food justice and feed their communities, and they do a lecture series once a year, but it's a very small percentage of what their operations are. This funding is not for them, even though we'll continue to support them through our project-based grants. This funding we're talking about, the operating support, is based on the whole institution, and that the majority of what they do and what you all do is museums, arts, culture, history work. At the end of the day, when you're eligible, your grant will be at least $5,000, and it could go up to $500,000. As Liz said, it depends on the number of organizations in the pool and also the size of your organization, and the operating budget information we ask for and we'll talk about really helps us right size those awards. You have until November 15th at 11:59 p.m. to submit your application. If you start one today and you finish today, submit today. You don't have to wait. There's no secret advantage to going another 2 weeks. Whatever you do, don't let the clock strike midnight. We're like Cinderella. We have a date stamp here for when applications will be accepted and when they'll be too late. And again, here we have a link to our online grants portal. The number one thing we're going to keep saying here, Leanne's working the chat today, but if you've got questions after, email her. She can help you figure out if you've got an organization profile already in our grant system, if you don't know how to get into the system, if you need to change who the contact individuals are, any kind of questions about the application or our system, Leanne will be able to help you. And then at the bottom of the page, we have a frequently asked questions, which we're continuing to update as new questions come in and we're seeing in frequency, as well as information about our other information sessions. And then when we finish one like today, we'll get the recording and add it to our list so you can go back and see it, or if you have colleagues that weren't able to join. But let's leave our landing spot and go to the guidelines. And I won't repeat the stuff we already talked about, but if you click eligibility guidelines, a new tab will pop up with our grant guidelines. Again, a lot of the information at the beginning is about who's eligible. This is not to scare you away again, but I will highlight the second paragraph here. So while this is operating support, and by and large, unless it's in the funding exclusions we're going to see here, and you can't use the money on it, you will be able to use the money on it. There are some things that we're trying to do. We're using this funding. The Connecticut legislature appropriated this funding and the governor signed it into law to do things like bring our community, our sector whole after COVID. And if folks lost employees or employee hours, to be able to bring them back and rehire and add new staff, to connect our content to K-12 teachers and help to deal with the education gap that's developed because of the pandemic, to help improve our state's overall information and technology and digital infrastructure. So at the end of the day, if you can use your funds to support staffing, educational work, digital work, this will help with the priorities that we have and that the legislature has. And while this year's funding is really going to end up being everyone that's eligible comes in will get an award based on a percentage of operating budgets that is equitable to the whole pool. Next year, the application process, the questions, the award process is going to be different and more competitive, and it will look at, in many ways, what you did this year with the funding and how you were able to move the needle in the direction that we're trying to move the state. So just something to keep in mind. Not going to go over the eligibility, which we already talked about. We talked about the maximum awards. One thing I want to call out here, whatever funding you receive from the Office of the Arts or Connecticut Humanities or NEH, NEA, shuttered venue operator grants, none of that is going to impact your grant award. The one thing that you do need to note, if you are an organization that is called out by name or is part of a consortium that receives line item funding in the state budget, we're going to ask you to enter what that amount of funding was for 22, and that will be taken into consideration as we right size awards. Doesn't mean you're not going to get an award. It just means we want to be able to know that so we can equitably provide funding to organizations that have not received funding already from the state budget as a line item. If your organization does not know if you have a line item, you probably don't have one. If you've got questions about that, you can ask. But again, this does not include the operating support that your organization may have received from the Office of the Arts. That is not the funding we're talking about. That does not impact your award. We've talked about eligibility, so I'm not going to go over these again. I will point out that the organizations not eligible for funding are for-profit organizations and individuals. But I want to also point out that while individual artists or scholars or knowledge keepers are not able to apply for funding on their own, we encourage the organizations that do receive this funding to work with them, run programs, run exhibitions, include them in the mission-based work that you do, and this will get back to individuals that way. Again, eligible expenses, it's pretty wide, from staff salary to utility bills to, again, the last bullet point, other costs related to the work that you do for your mission and your purpose. There is no match. You do not need to provide a one-to-one match or any other match to these funds. We are giving you a one-year project period. All these grants are coming in middle of November, November 15th. We're going to be approving these grant awards at our board meeting in December 21st, and then award calls are going to happen before Christmas. This is going to be one big holiday blowout of grant awards. And everyone will get a grant period from January 1 of 22 to December 31 of 22. But because this funding was allocated in this Connecticut State Legislature fiscal year, you could assign funding retroactively to July 1 of 21. Funding exclusions, I won't go over them all. I mean, there are a lot of the things that you are familiar with. You can't booze it up, can't go lobbying. But the things I want to especially point out is you are not allowed to use this to purchase artifacts, works of art, or documents. You can't add to your collection with these funds. And you can't use these funds directly to do renovation, restoration, rehabilitation, or construction of your site. But as we've said at some of these previous calls, if you receive, let's say, a $15,000 award, and you are normally going to be paying your staff with your own funds of $15,000, and you choose to use our funds that we award you to now pay your staff, you could shift your own funding to do rehab, restoration, and renovation. You can't use our direct funds, but if you're freeing up other funds in your budget because of this award, you can use your own funds to do those things. Deadline we already talked about, and if you click online grant portal, it will take you to what we're going to talk about next. The last thing I want to say before we do that, however, is if you click this link, it will take you directly to a brand new application that you can start filling out. We kind of skipped a few steps to get you there so you don't have to navigate through our system. Our system saves as you go. So every 5 minutes, I believe it is, it backs up your data. There's a manual save button on the bottom of the screen. So if you're nervous or you're going to step away and you want to make sure it's saving, you can force save. You can leave and come back. If you leave and come back and you click this button again or this button here, it will take you to another brand new application that has none of the information you saved in it. So don't panic, don't worry. You can click the little home icon at the top of the screen, which will take you to your applicant dashboard. You'll then find your grant that you've started there, and there will be a blue edit button on the right that you can click to start working on the already saved started application. But if you do click on the application, I've got the PDF of it here. After, again, we're trying to make sure we're not getting all those firefighting groups across the state to apply, because I feel really horrible when I tell these people that do great work to keep us safe that this money's not for them. So there will be some more language here to try to get them not to fill out an application. There'll be some yes, no bubbles, which again, for you all, you are culture humanities organizations. This is what your mission is. You will need to check whether you're a 501c3, which I'm sure most of you will be, or a municipality. This will pop up follow-up questions that we need based on your organization type. And we just need to make sure that you've got financial statements that cover the last 3 years and this year. If you're a brand new organization and you only been around for 2 years and you say, I don't have organization financials from 3 years ago, that's fine. When you get to those questions, answer 0 and upload a sheet of paper that says our organization was formed in 2019. We don't have a budget before then. Questions about 501c3s. We do need you to have a business ID number, and there'll be information here about how you can look up what yours is. If you don't have one, it's a fairly simple process to achieve, but the Office of the Arts requires that you have these to make sure that you are a Connecticut business registered with the Secretary of State. Municipality, again, sometimes it's not clear what town your organization is from, so we just want to be clear about that. If you're a municipality, if you are a Connecticut State College or university, we want to make clear that you understand that the maximum award you'll receive is $5,000. But we are opening this up to the Yale Rep Theaters, Peabody Museums, and the other state college and universities across the state. If you click Other, tell us what kind of organization you are, but email Leanne right away, because we want to talk to you before you go too far down the application to make sure that you are in fact eligible. We have some information here at the top that GuideStar can fill out for you. So let me actually show you what that looks like. We'll go to submitted application here just quickly. So when you get to that section of the grant, you'll see there's a little blue square with a sunburst in it. And if you click that, it will allow you to autofill from GuideStar your primary organization name, if you haven't, also known as, your EIN number, what year the government gave you your non-tax status. You don't need to look these things up. You can autofill it straight from GuideStar, which is a cool feature. After that, tell us what type of organization you are. And if you're an organization that is multiple things, click the multiples. You're a historic house that has a exhibition space, and you're also an art museum, click all three. Again, if you click Other, let us know what the other is. We talked about some of these things we're asking for gatekeeping purposes. So this is where you would enter your organization's purpose from your bylaws, your mission statement, a brief little description about the types of things you do. If you do changing exhibitions every year, you run lectures, you do walking tours, let us know the types of public activities that you do. This is operating support. This is not a project support. You are not presenting a plan that will be approved and that is competitive for how you want to use the funding. Everyone that is eligible will get a grant, like we said. But on the other hand, we'd love to know right now at the outset, if you were to receive an award, what are the 1, 2, or 3 things that you would most want to use these funding for, whether it's hiring additional staff, working to increase your visitation, or if you're in survival mode because the pandemic has really hit you hard, let us know that too. We need to know how many places are really just trying to stay afloat right now. There's a block where you can give us a little bit more explanation on the things that you chose above. But we're also thinking big picture here. You know, I think Jason and Liz have used the words transformational here. We want to know, this is transformational funding for our state. It's unprecedented funding. How do you hope that this will be transformational for your organization and what you want to do and the goals that you've had and not been able to achieve? Beyond that, besides money, are there other things that you would need that would help you realize transformational change? You're having trouble recruiting volunteers. You'd love to work with interns. There are some trainings that you really have been looking for that you haven't found anywhere that would help you and guide you and your board and your staff to do your work better. Let us know what those additional needs are, and we might be able to help support achieving some of those as long as we have a better grasp of what the collective needs of our state are. We ask for your physical address. We know some of you might only have a PO box, but let us know where that PO box is. Because at the end of the day, we're going to create maps of where the funding goes. We need to know where to put a pin on the map, and we need to know which legislators to let know about the awards that are happening in their community. We also want to know what your mailing address is. This is for a silly little thing that we do, paper checks. We want to make sure that the check gets to you the first time, not on the second time. So do let us know where you want mail, like your checks, to go. We want your website and whatever social media channels you use. We will help promote you. If you did Kids Free with us, you saw my colleague Amy does a lot of great social media posts throughout the length of this grant to talk about all the wonderful organizations that our state has, and we want to know how to tag you and connect back to your channels. We have added some new fields to our organization profile for this year, and we ask that you please, as you're filling out this application, go to the top of the page. You can click the black pencil icon here to edit organization, and you will be able to fill in some information for new fields that we have specifically related to your mailing address and your state legislative districts. This will again help us continue to advocate on your behalf. Whoop. Someone stopped the recording, but I'll keep talking. Operational budget. We want to know what fiscal year you have and when your fiscal year begins and ends. If you're Jan 1 to December 31, July 1 to June 30, it doesn't matter, just let us know. And then whatever year you're in, when we ask for your current year, give us that stuff. If your year runs to October 16th, you're still in your current year. Your next year is the year that begins in 2 days from now. We want to know your previous year, your previous 2 years, your previous 3 years ago. Again, we're asking for this data not to make it hard, not to make you go through files and trying to find stuff, but because we know that some organizations have shrunk because of the pandemic, and we want to right size awards and try to get organizations back to whole again, and we need to know where you were versus where you are. One other thing I'll point out that I passed over for the current year, if you do receive operating support in the state budget via line item funding, this is where you would enter that amount here. We have similar information for staffing. Want to know how many staff you have today and how many contractors you have today. And by contractors, more mission-based people that help you do your job, more long-term contractors. Does not need to be every time you had a carpenter come and fix a creaky stair, but we want to know the impact of our sector and who we're supporting. And this is for paid staff, full-time, part-time contractors. If you have volunteers that are serving these roles but are not being compensated, track their time and enter it in the volunteer hours contributed. Don't go crazy. I don't want to hear people are spending 3 days trying to figure out this section. Your best estimates are fine, but no, this is the kind of information we're tracking. And if you're not tracking it in a way that's easily reachable, this is the kind of stuff you might want to find ways to be able to pull more quickly when we ask for it again in the future, because we'll be asking for this stuff again in the future. And most of these blocks all have a opportunity to give us more information, like the budget section. You can give us more information about your budget and financials and anything else you want to share that's optional. The last thing I'll say, and then we'll go to some Q&As here, the applicant information at the bottom. Our system requires every grant be given a project title that you assign. You don't have to go crazy here. There's no magic answer. If you're Essex Historical Society, just put Essex Historical Society Cultural Fund Operating Support Grant here. And then there's 3 people we ask for. Authorizing Signatory. This is when you get a grant and we're putting a name on a contract. Whose name do you want to be on that contract? That's the name we're looking for to sign the grant contract after the awards are made. Project Director. Who do you want to be the main point of contact between Connecticut Humanities and your organization about this grant moving forward? That's the person we're going to call and email when we want to talk to you about your project. And then Fiscal Agent. What we mean by Fiscal Agent here is who is the person that's going to be responsible for managing the grant funds coming and going. As a check and balance, this can't be the Project Director. We want one person to be managing the project, a different person to be signing off on the money to make sure that funds are being used correctly. Your Fiscal Agent could be your board treasurer, it could be your staff accountant, it could be the bookkeeper you have to manage your files. Just as long as it's not the project director, it's fine. And then we do not have paper applications, it's all electronic. So there's a certification block with a simple check and the name of the person that's certifying that they have read the rules of this grant and are certifying that they're answering everything honestly. Finally, an e-newsletter opt-in. We will continue to contact you about this grant and all things related to it. But if you want to be added onto our grant e-newsletter so you receive information about other opportunities from Connecticut Humanities, please do click the yes box here. So we will add you and you'll start to get our monthly news blast. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing screen. Go back to our Brady Bunch squares and ask if there are any questions. You could raise your hand and use that feature. If there are some things in the chat right now, we can start to pull up those and deal with them. But now is your chance to ask questions that I'm seeing some people that are jumping off. Leanne put her contact information. There are no questions in the chat, but Ann has a question.
Hi, this is wonderful news, and I'm delighted and thank you to the state legislature. I have many hats. I'm a executive director of several performing arts groups, but I'm also a grant writer for several arts organizations. I have individual emails for perhaps 3 or 4 of the organizations, but I imagine I'll be doing 7 of these. Can I use the same login to Connecticut Humanities to do an application for 3 separate organizations?
No, I mean, I know you're not alone in this, but the way our system really works is that an individual email address gets a kind of attached to an organization. So you're going to need to, even if it's just the kind of thing you're using for the grant, set up some sort of an email address or have someone monitor it on your behalf and use their email address for the organization. You can't have one organizational email address go to 3 different organizations.
Okay. And one really quick question. I believe that can we use a fiscal agent, i.e. another organization's EIN for an arts organization that is not a 501c3?
Yes, so this should not be an end run to trying to get individuals funded or for-profits a way to get funding, but we are allowing fiscal sponsorship for this grant line because we know that there are some organizations that are really new and don't have their status long enough to apply directly, or they are emerging and they're still in the process of deciding if becoming a 501c3 is right for them. But if the organization is functioning, emerging, and always, in purposes of a nonprofit cultural organization that otherwise would be eligible, but just does not have the right credentials yet, we encourage you to apply through an eligible organization, whether that be Shoreline Arts or one of the other designated regional service organizations, your local community foundation. If you've got questions about that, please do reach out to Leanne and we can help you on that front.
Great, thanks. This organization has received a Reggie grant in the past, so I think it would be. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks, you, Ann. So we had a question about documents required for financial statements in the chat there. We're trying to be broad here. We don't want this to be, again, a burden, but at the end of the day, some document that shows your finances, income with a total and revenue with a total for total income and total revenue. That could be an audited financial statement. It could be your 990. It could be some other final year budget statement that you produce for the organization. For your current year, if it's a profit and loss statement, again, something that's showing income sources, expenditures, and you've got a wide variety of latitude there. Contractor was a question, and then we'll go to Frank. So the contractor category, again, use your best guesses here. But I think, yes, if you're contracting with musicians and you're doing 20 different performances over the course of the year on a contract basis with 20 different musicians, let us know that you're working with 20 artists over the year and enter that number into the field there. If you are an orchestra and all of the musicians that you hire on a contract basis, but every performance, even though they're working with you for the year, they're not a paid staff member, they're not on payroll, they're all on contract basis. Let us know the total number of musicians that you're employing currently or in a given year, and help us enter those numbers. Frank.
Hi, I'm at the Brantford Arts and Cultural Alliance, and sort of related to a statement you made a little bit earlier. We're transitioning from, a very small nonprofit raising, having events to raise some money and doing some things around town to having been able to actually create a gallery in the center of town, which is now functioning, fairly well. So our budget, when we look at our budget, we're not going to have an awful lot that things remain. We have no staff, no audited, financial budgetary statements, but now we're transitioning to that. We have a part-time person now who operates the gallery. So is it going to be detrimental to us to not have a history of, more elaborate financial statements and moving into a place now where we do have an operating budget and we do have, salary responsibilities, and we're hoping we're using a facility which is a loan to us, and we hope to be able to turn it into a permanent site. And so we're going to need, so anyway, Michael, I don't want to get too complicated, but is that going to be detrimental to us to not have a history?
My short answer is no. My short answer is no, Frank. I mean,
okay.
we know that it's going to be tough to, there are literally historical societies that have celebrated their 125th anniversary, and there are some places that have just started, 18 months ago, and you can't compare the track record or the financial history of places that are, apples to tangerines. So to give us the honest information for where you were, for where you are. We also have the space to project out. You don't have to give us a budget, but we're projecting where you're going to be next year for whatever year your next year is. And then at the bottom, there's that optional block where you can provide more information about your budget and tell us that story. Use that space to explain who you were, who you now are, who you're becoming. And we will take all this into consideration if we write size awards.
All right, one last question. So you say it's 1 year funding. Does all the funding have to be spent in a year?
So you will need to use this funding, and there's an 18-month window basically, because we're going to give you a January 1 to December 31 window going forward, with also the ability to use retroactively to the beginning of this state's fiscal year of July 1. But yes, you need to obligate the funds and have spent the funds within that window.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep. Leanne or Liz, there's been a lot coming in the chat here. I'm not sure if you want to highlight any of these that have been coming in, because I've lost my school.
It's mostly specific questions about if you have they're called staff for an organization, but they only work a very small amount of time and they're only paid about a total of $500, but they're paid through a third-party payroll. And so what I was just saying is, if they have taxes withheld, they could be considered very, very part-time staff. If they do not have taxes withheld, then they could still be paid through a payroll, because the employer will always tell the payroll agency what to withhold. So they could be withheld through, they could be paid through a third party and not have taxes withheld. So it does get a little bit complicated sometimes. Do the very best you can. If you are aware of a situation, represent it as best you can, and otherwise reach out to Leanne and she'll be able to sort of clarify.
And one thing I will say, which is sort of related to this, but sort of different, is this is a unique grant line. I know there have been a lot of places that have been frustrated with the funding that's come out, in large part because of the pandemic, where they find out, I am too small for this funding. I am too large for this funding. This is a unique opportunity that size really does not matter here. And everyone that's eligible is going to get an award, and we'll write size it based on a percentage. Now, that said, if you're a very small organization with a $15,000 a year budget and you get the minimum $5,000 award, obviously that's a huge percentage of your operating budget compared to some of the larger organizations. But at the end of the day, we've hopefully created a system here where the small and the large are all at the table together in an equitable way.
And understand that we do understand that there's already deep inequities in terms of funding, how small organizations stay small sometimes and large organizations stay large. However, we need to collect the data, which is what we're doing now. So we're doing the very best we can to make sure that everybody is included. And then that will inform, as Scott mentioned in the beginning, what will happen next year.
And I should say, and this is a good time for that, we've tried to keep the application as simple as possible, really only asking the questions at this point in time that we need to write size awards. when we get to the contract stage after Christmas, in addition to needing to sign and return a contract to get your first check, we are going to be launching a survey for your organizations to give us some more information about the work that you do and who you are. We're working with Susie Wilkening of Wilkening Consultants out in the West Coast. She's worked with us previously at Connecticut Humanities when she was at Reach Advisors and did the 2008 Cultural Consumer Study. Since then, she's gone big time and has worked with the American Alliance of Museums and the Association of Children's Museums, and really is helping to talk about the impact of our sector, what visitors to our institutions want, and she's going to help us create the right survey instruments to ask the right questions to really demonstrate impact on our sector with each other, with the public, and with the legislature. So you will need to, at the time of award, fill out a survey to be able to get your first check, and then we will be asking follow-up surveys at the end of year one, beginning of year two, and the end of year two funding. So that's something to be knowing is coming, but we should get some really good data, as Liz is saying, about who we are, and Susie is going to help making sure we're asking the right questions to get that, and then helping us share it in a meaningful, understandable way.
I'll just piggyback to what Scott said, because I don't think it's come up, but for those of you who have applied for grants through the Office of the Arts or Connecticut Humanities, you know that there is always a final report required. So there will be a final report for this particular grant. Folks have asked in other sessions, well, what kind of information are you going to ask? What kind of data are you going to collect? And you will know more about that once we have that pre-survey that you'll get when you receive your grant contract, and will allow Connecticut Humanities to execute the contract. But the one thing I'll just tag right now, for those of you who are museums who may have participated in the Summer at the Museums program, it is going to become increasingly important for us to sort of capture information about visitation to our sites. If you do have a site to visit, or if you're selling tickets, or if you're performing concerts, who's coming, and that is going to be the subject of sort of upcoming webinars that Connecticut Humanities are going to present, because we're not actually, this is no surprise. It's not like we're not good at that in Connecticut. Unless you're a big organization, it's unlikely that you're really, really good at that, with some very notable exceptions. So don't feel like you're behind the 8 ball. If you have to make some guesses, just make educated guesses, and there'll always be an option to say, one of the things that we're asking is, how do you know what you know? Right? So do you know because you have people sign a guest book, or do you know because you actually are selling tickets on Eventbrite and you're like tracking zip codes? So it could be a multitude of ways, but those are going to be the things that we're going to discuss as the year goes on. Collecting data will be sort of upfront in the process, but don't let it give you a heart attack.
And I envision we're going to be creating tools that we'll be sharing and doing trainings on our own with our partners like Eric and Shoreline Arts when we roll this stuff out, just like today, to try to help you feel as comfortable as possible and give you the information you need. We're not going to be dropping huge requirements and traps on you along the way. This is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of a conversation.
I'll just answer the question Lynn asked. Yep, so this is a grant from Connecticut Humanities, has nothing to, our grant management systems are not the same. So you will be setting up an account with Connecticut Humanities grant making platform.
And again, if you don't know if you have an account, you don't remember how to get into the account, you don't know whose names are on the account, you need to change all that information. Those are all things that Leanne can help you do and get the communications right for your organization. We've answered everybody's questions. This is great.
We're clearly getting better at this, Scott.
I'll wait to see if there are any others as they pop up here. I will take this opportunity, since we have a lull in the conversation, to say that yesterday, like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so we haven't even hit 24 hours yet, we launched another funding opportunity that is separate from this, that is funded with federal money from the American Recovery Plan. I will put the link to that in the chat here. I encourage humanities organizations. It's a little bit complicated here because this funding is coming from the National Endowment for the Humanities. While Connecticut Humanities and the Office of the Art are blurring the lines and really working well together. Some of the federal organizations are still siloing organizations from arts to humanities a little bit more. But if you are a humanities, a history, a cultural organization, and not a performing arts institution, we have our federal SHARP grants now live. These will provide up to $10,000 for organizations to do project-based work for a project to help you recover from the pandemic and continue to serve your community going forward. This could be to bring back staff. It could be to hire consultants to do things like give you the strategic plan to guide you coming out of the pandemic, or hiring an audience evaluator to figure out what your community wants from you now for safe programming. I don't want to confuse people here, but I want to let people know that that's there, and you could check that out and let Leanne and I know. Timing wise, Leanne and I are setting ourselves up for a crazy next couple of months, because these grants will also be due November 15th. These award decisions will also come the week of Christmas. So I think Christmas week, we're going to be making somewhere in the neighborhood of like $20 million of grant awards. So you can apply for both the SHARP funding and the operating support. Those are two separate pots. One does not preclude you from the other. This does not preclude you from going to any other opportunity that Liz has with her grant lines. This does not preclude you from going to any other opportunity we have with our grant lines. So you could still go for a small project-based quick grant in addition to operating support, in addition to a federal SHARP grant from us. And that is perfectly acceptable.
Well, guys, thanks so much for doing all this for this community, for the state of Connecticut. This is an amazing day for us all. I would suggest that we cut it off, since it looks like most of the questions have been answered, and that if we get some more, we'll forward them on to you. Does that sound like a good plan?
That sounds good. And I can hang around for a few minutes if people are intimidated by Facebook Live and recording. By all means, we can turn the recording off, and happy to hang around for a couple of moments and answer questions on a more casual basis. But again, Eric, thank you for hosting us and bringing everyone together. Liz, Jason, Leanne, thank you for all the work that you're doing on this grant line. And it's an exciting collaboration, and one I'm really looking forward to seeing how we can grow the community together over the next 2 years, and hopefully beyond. That's part of the goal of this too, is that this funding is not sundown at 2 years, and we're going to keep moving on and keep finding ways to get more funding to help all the cultural community.
Yeah, and to that note, and what Liz said about having data now to be able to share in the future to some of our stakeholders is going to be fantastic, I believe. So thank you for making that effort, both of you.